Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Finding Genius video series. I'm joined with Heidi Patel from ReThink Impact. Heidi, thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Just as a quick introduction, Heidi's a managing partner, like I said, at ReThink Impact. She's based in San Francisco, sits on the boards of companies such as Spring Health, OnQ, Ketos, and previously she was a president at New Island Capital Management, institutional scale, 100% mission focused investment advisor. You've dedicated most of your life towards impact investments and spent some time at the Acumen Fund Global Fellow working with Delight Design India, Delight, sorry. But I think where I wanted to start and to context set a bit is a lot of folks want to aspirationally be in impact investments. So I was thinking it would be interesting to hear your path into impact investing, out of investment banking, out of traditional venture capital at Time Warner Ventures, and where you began to first see those opportunities within impact, just to level set the conversation a bit.
Sure, happy to do that. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I went from college right to Wall Street. Very traditional, conventional finance, working 100+ hour weeks during corporate finance, M&A, IPOs, etc. And I actually really loved the work. I thought it was exciting. I was always investing or looking at companies at the intersections between technology and either education or media or communication. So I liked being on that cutting edge. I think I realized the culture wasn't a great fit for me for the long term. So I transitioned into corporate venture capital at Time Warner Ventures. And we were a small, scrappy team. I think there were three of us under 30 that were working together. We were trying to deploy $500 million. I got there at the time where we had just been acquired by AOL. So really, really interesting to be there way back when these two large companies were trying to ultimately unsuccessfully combine. And again, like just loved working with entrepreneurs. I loved thinking about what's coming next, 5, 7 years down the road. And I had this moment, at this point I'd moved from New York down to DC and there was an election going on. And I was the only member in my group, despite being in our nation's capital, that voted that day. And I just realized, there wasn't that type of values alignment in terms of integrating what you care about as people with what we're doing all day, every day. And I thought, hey, if we're putting so much of this capital, blood, sweat, and tears into these companies that are quote unquote changing the world, wouldn't it be great if they actually were changing the world for the better? So I didn't know what that looked like. Impact investing did not exist at that time. So I went back to California, where I'm from. I went to business school at Stanford to figure out how do I merge this passion for, solving the biggest problems with my experience and training as an investor. And those jobs didn't really exist at that time, at that moment. So that's when my journey started. It was at business school, just trying to expose myself to as much as I could, whether it was strategic nonprofits, venture philanthropy, which was sort of hot at that time, or actually using the tools of the private sector, private capital, in order to bring solutions to market. So that's where really the journey began.
Interesting. And I guess I had a similar background where I was on Wall Street and got jaded and wanted to join Impact. So I went to charity work at the nonprofit. But there's a lot of folks that leave kind of traditional positions and traditional careers for impact investing. But when you were actually doing it and you were saying that this is something I want to focus on, and you've done incredibly well since business school, who were some of the pioneers that were building out the space in terms of impact investments and the focus areas and the business models, the return models, and how to actually pitch it to LPs that you were looking to, maybe specifically at Stanford or even after that?
Yeah, and again, it was just so early. So I think these first movers, pioneers, is the right way to think about it. And I think even then, impact investing probably started as this quasi philanthropic movement. Or can you use a business model to address social issues when before it had just been philanthropy? So it came on the scene as an alternative to philanthropy. I think what we've learned since then, what my experience has been in my career, is that impact can actually fuel growth and fuel return. So there's not this trade-off conversation that existed way back then. But at that time, I mean, certainly, Acumen Fund with Jacqueline Novogratz, what they were doing, they were the biggest and the earliest and the first to really think about private sector tools for social good. Pacific Community Ventures, which was led by Penelope Douglas, early mover, even Root Capital, who was thinking really creatively about using debt capital in emerging markets in order to spur local economic development and green local economic development. And, even folks like Jed Emerson, who was this, a one-man think tank and thought leader about the blended value principle. And he was the one that really educated me about, the dirty secret in philanthropy around foundations and how
Right,
every,
right.
every dollar that goes into a foundation, only 5 cents needs to get paid out each year in grants. And 95 cents can be invested in whatever you want, no restrictions. And so there's tons of capital sitting in foundations today, and the endowments are oftentimes invested with a conventional lens, which means the investment dollars for foundations may be undoing all the good works that are happening on the program side of the house. And so it just felt like there was this enormous opportunity to marshal capital into the space and create real change at scale.
And was there a push and pull in terms of the types of models or the approaches that some of these pioneers were using? Because I know you went and joined Acumen and then you were spending some time abroad focusing on some of the models there. But what did you see with some of these pioneers and how they were pushing it forward early on and how that's influenced Rethink Impact? And then maybe we can spend more time there and kind of where the fund is at now.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly when people think about impact investing in those early days, it was grounded in this idea of the bottom of the pyramid. Here are folks who are making, $2, $3, $4, $5 a day. There are billions of them all around the world. They are oftentimes paying a poverty premium. They're actually paying more for basic goods and services because they are poor, because they live in far-flung places. And so the idea was, can you turn them from passive recipients of aid and charity into powerful consumers that can act with dignity and they have money to spend, but they just don't have great options in terms of products and services, particularly ones that were tech enabled or cutting edge or better quality than what was available elsewhere. And so I think that was really the conversation was, can we address the bottom of the pyramid? And that's where it started. And I think, there are a lot of inherent challenges in that, right? Because there's massive infrastructure issues, which make it really, really hard to reach all those billions of people purely through for-profit capital. I think what we learned is that quasi-philanthropic concessionary capital was oftentimes necessary to deliver those products and services. But fast forward, I think what we have found is two things. One, there are companies that are growing like crazy, reaching those populations through purely digital means. Companies like Ngaza in our portfolio, companies like PayJoy, companies like Tala, started by Shivani Soroya. And now I think we've also learned in the US, which was my passion to come back here and apply all the lessons I learned working in this first social enterprise in India back here in the US, was that technology could be used to address some of these big problems, social, environmental, at scale. And so I think that quasi-philanthropic lens that's been let go. I think we've realized that it doesn't have to be this trade-off that there was when you're really working, trying to deliver things into remote villages, whether it's in India or sub-Saharan Africa.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, Shivani was also on this series too. So everything she's built with Tala is super impressive. But
It
the
was amazing.
founders that look to create impact, and you just mentioned some of the founders that are doing an amazing job of it. There's also been, I read a book called Do Good Better. I think I was very focused and interested in this space, and a lot of people have read that. When they're looking at the attempts to create a positive impact that have raised millions in capital, and investors sometimes might not fully understand the unintended consequences of what they're investing in. That
Yeah.
might come from foundations, it might come from corporates, it might come from budgets that are completely outside of traditional capital. But I think the biggest example is Plate Pump, which had taken in
Mm-hmm.
millions of dollars. Could you discuss how you discern or evaluate impact when making investments, especially if that philanthropic lens isn't there and it really is just the for-profit business models of creating impact, even just beyond just the base of the pyramid? But can you talk about what your evaluation metrics look like, or the models that Rethink Impact is designed for investors to evaluate these businesses?
Absolutely. I think, one thing that I've been doing now for years and years that's really critical to what we do at Rethink Impact, and I teach several sessions on it in the class I teach at the business school at Stanford on impact investing, is the idea of impact diligence. And unintended consequences is a really big piece of that. So really thinking that through. I think the play pumps example that you bring up, we talk a lot within traditional VC about founder market fit, right? Obviously there's product market fit. Everybody knows what that is. Founder market fit. And that was a classic example of someone that came in with a savior mindset, extremely well-intentioned, who was using the tools from his background to try to address a problem that he had not lived. And so I think this idea of cultural competency within the founder market fit, is really critical. And it's pretty obvious when you find it. Like, one example is from our portfolio is Helen Adeosun, who's a founder of Care Academy. So her parents came here from Nigeria, so immigrant parents. She was raised first generation. Her mother came here and worked as a home-based care worker. Helen, superstar, type A, brilliant woman, found herself at the education school at Harvard. So she's getting a master's degree in education, but obviously incredibly expensive to do that. And so in order to pay her way through school, her side hustle was also working as a home-based care worker. So she graduates from the education school at Harvard and starts an ed tech company focused on the home care industry. So now she's raised $10 or $15 million for Care Academy. It's an SMB SaaS-driven business that's now expanding into enterprise. They're growing like crazy, like any SaaS business that you want. And they're on track to reach thousands of home-based care agencies and to educate millions of home-based care workers, helping them to move up the economic ladder while improving healthcare at home for families around the country. So that founder had very deep founder market fit, had a lived experience that she could bring to bear as she's building this company, but also had all this traditional academic background and training, having gone through the Ivy League system as well. And so we're trying to find that type of balance. And I think one thing I also learned working for a venture-backed startup in India was that we had incredible impact-minded investors. Acumen was one of them, who were amazing at shining a light on what D-Light was trying to build, shining a light on this problem, marshaling philanthropic capital to the space. But it was our local investors, Nexus Capital, that actually had the Rolodex, that was rolling up their sleeves and helping us build this business. And so I think I push, on the investor community as well. It's like, where can you really add value? Venture is about building businesses. Like, our job when we sit on the board is to roll up those sleeves, lean in, do whatever we can to clear obstacles for our founders and bring them resources. It's that day-to-day blocking and tackling that helps build businesses. And that's really hard to do across an ocean.
That's really interesting. That just opened up a ton more questions. So hopefully I can get to them in the next 10 minutes. But when you, the series is called Find the Genius, and it was based off of 50 interviews with different VCs, and they went into primarily the kind of traditional entrepreneurs. I know we're trying to blur the lines between a founder who's creating impact versus a traditional founder, and they're one and the same. But when you define genius for a founder such as one from Talo or Care Academy, are there certain qualities behind what you just mentioned that maybe you're teaching at Stanford or you're looking to evaluate in founders themselves that define genius when you look at a founder who's looking to create impact?
Yeah, the things that we look for, the genius is when it all comes together, right? And so, one of our examples is, Spring Health, for example. So it was really early stage when we got involved, right? 3 co-founders, all under 30, all immigrants. One had dropped out of Yale to start one company. This was her second company. She'd come from the product industry, product background. Her co-founder, so that was April Coe, her co-founder, Adam Schuckraud, was coming out of the PhD program at Yale. So he's the world's leading expert on computational psychiatry. And so you have this power duo, this power team that's trying to solve a massive issue, mental health. And mental health has a disproportionate effect on women, low income, people of color. So that's kind of social justice lens that we put on. We're looking for impactful deals within digital health. That's the lens we're using, the social justice lens. So Adam and April were focused on mental health, and they were bringing an evidence-based, clinically validated solution. So real science, real data-driven approaches to help people feel better faster, not just connect them through a marketplace with therapists, but actually change how care is delivered and make people feel better faster. So we're looking for this brilliant combination of talent, hustle, pace. Being able to move quickly in this space is so important. I mean, dedication to outcomes,
Right.
not just
Right.
riding the zeitgeist, but like actually, are we making a difference? Does our product work and improve lives? And that's the genius, is the combination of those elements.
Right. And are those product metrics that a traditional company would look at, or are there certain outcome metrics that you as a board member are also helping to put in place to measure the outcomes specifically with a company like Spring Health to know that they're actually creating impact?
It's both. It's both. I mean, what, we people talk a lot about impact measurement and impact evaluation, and I think I mentioned before impact diligence. Like what we're doing when we're underwriting investment or doing our diligence for the first time is we're doing a deep dive on the academic research that exists. We want to really understand the problem, and we want to understand why is it that this intervention is the one that's going to make the difference, and do we have any proof points? And that naturally comes up with like one or two or three impact KPIs that we can track over time. And oftentimes there are things that companies are already measuring because that's what they live and breathe. Like Adam and April live and breathe mental health, right? Helen Adeocean lives and breathes educating these care workers, getting them certified skills so they can take with them and move up the economic ladder. So these are things that the founders are passionate about, and they're tracking them anyway. And I would say, sometimes the board is like, that's great. As long as it doesn't take too much time, that's fine. Other times they really get it. They understand how impact and traditional KPIs can go hand in hand and feed each other.
Right. Right. And we haven't spent too much time on this. We've been talking about the founders you've backed, which is very kind of you. But can you discuss a bit more the founding story of Rethink and I think the principles that Jenny and you were going after when you first launched it in terms of the areas where you wanted to invest and the stage at which you wanted to invest, the types of investors you wanted to collaborate with, and how that maybe has evolved as you guys have gone deeper into the space too.
Yeah, I would say it hasn't evolved a ton. So Jenny and I have. I mean, it's amazing. We did not know each other before starting Rethink Impact. So the kismet of us coming together is a whole other story. But it's a very unusual kind of pairing of people to build something that's very long term together. And I think we saw, we knew it when we saw it that we would be great partners, and I think that's proven out now. 5 or 6 years later. But she had gone to Harvard Business School, and she had worked at Washington Post. She had been a C-level exec at several venture-backed companies, and she felt like in the boardroom, on exec team, she was always the only woman. When she went through her fundraising process, when she was a CEO, raising venture dollars, it was all male investors, all male board, and she thought, my class at Harvard, and certainly my class at Stanford, were half women. Like, where are all the women?
Right.
And then she started looking at the numbers, as had I when I was at New Island Capital, around 2% of all venture dollars going towards women, a number that hadn't budged for 20 years when Jenny's mom, Patty Abramson, was actually running a venture firm with this idea, and the numbers hadn't moved in 20 years. Yet there's all this data and research and more coming out every day, whether it's from, Allraise or others, that women are driving great returns for investors. They're more capital efficient, doing more with the dollars that they do raise, finding exits earlier, greater profitability when there's a more gender diverse team, gender diverse board, yet this enormous funding gap existed. So we wanted to solve that, and we came together with this deep passion to solve that, while also trying to create positive impact with the core products and services of the businesses. And so, we came together and we surveyed the field, right? And what we saw is, hey, there are these funds out there at the seed stage that are focused on gender, focused on impact. So what that said to us is, oh, this is great. The market is getting really comfortable writing $1, maybe $2 million checks to women. Isn't that great? Let's keep going. But what happens after that? There was an enormous capital gap for women still at that Series A and B stage. So that's where we wanted to play. That's where we felt like we would have like the biggest leverage point. To get there, we needed scale. It's really hard to run a Series A, Series B strategy with less than 100 million in AUM.
Right.
So that is why we decided if we wanted to execute the strategy, we needed to go big. And that's where partnerships with folks like UBS came in. It was a way for us to get to scale early to execute on the strategy that we thought, number one, would make our investors, great returns. That's always the idea for any venture investor. But also, I think that's where we saw the real need and the impact. And we're the largest in the country doing what we do then, and 5 years later, it's still the truth. And I wish it weren't,
Right,
but
right.
that's where.
And is the motivation still primarily to focus on female founders and to improve gender diversity across the entire startup ecosystem and the venture ecosystem, or are you also focused on kind of these individual verticals such as mental health and where Spring Health is focused, and finding women founders in specific industries and verticals to do it?
It's both. We have 4 verticals we focus on. So digital health is one, ed tech, environmental sustainability, and then sort of a catch-all economic empowerment, which can look like fintech for good, SMB SaaS. And we're looking for that woman in the CEO slot. And so, we're just like any other venture firm. We see 1,000 deals a year, and everyone says, "Oh, it's so specialized. How many needles are you trying to thread?" Right? But of the 1,000 that we see, honestly, like 70% thread those needles. So there is no shortage of pipeline, especially for a fund like ours, which is only doing 4 or 5 new deals a year.
Right. And I think that would also be an interesting point, is when you are looking at it competitively, and ReThink Impact has developed a name for itself, but in a competitive venture market, how do you think about the deals that you guys are getting into and how you're sourcing them and how you're working with some of these females at the board level, or the founders in specific sectors? Are you helping to recruit interesting talent to focus on ideas, or is it you're coming up with the sector focus first and then going and finding the founder that's working on it? Can you talk a bit about your strategy in remaining competitive as a venture fund in this market?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting to us is how much of our deal flow is just inbound, because we've been super clear about who we are, what we care about, and what we're trying to build. And I think that founders these days are waking up to the fact that they have choices. They get to choose who's on their cap table, right? Whose term sheet they take, who's around the table with them, in their board meetings. And I think, the joke is very true that it's easier to get divorced than it is to get rid of your investors. And so, like, it's a really deep relationship that's very, very sticky. And I think a lot of founders are realizing that they do have a choice. And I think what's really exciting is seeing so many new firms pop up that have these focus areas as part of their strategy, whether it's diversity, whether it's impact, or both. I think that's really exciting. And so for us, I think what's competitive about it for us is that, or where we compete, is that there's just this level of authenticity. That's what we hear from the people in our pipeline, or folks that we've invested in, is that they know what we're all about. This is not impact washing. It's not greenwashing. We've been at this for years, and there's a level of authenticity, I think, that resonates with founders. I think they also like the fact that we are in their sectors. So they want folks that look like us, sound like us, that have a deep commitment. And I think they realize that, we're trying to be a top tier VC like anybody else. That's the story that we're trying to tell. We want to see hundreds of more founders like Rachel Carlson, one of the first female-led impact unicorns. And we just had another one, not in our portfolio, but Kate Ryder and what she's building with Maven.
Right.
So that's the story we want to tell. And I think, and if you ask our founders, we don't always get it right, but I think the way they describe us is the hardest working folks they have in the boardroom or on their cap table. Because this is the joy for me and Jenny is working with our founders, because they're just incredibly inspiring.
Great. Thank you. So I know we have maybe time for one last one, hopefully, but since you are teaching the course on this at Stanford, and you've spent time at Acumen and New Island Capital and now ReThink Impact, can you talk a bit more about folks that want to learn about impact investing and actually doing this in an intelligent way, beyond Do Good Better or other resources that are out there? What, maybe can you give the 30-second synopsis of your course or other materials that are out there that they should be soaking up in order to have an impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think Impact Alpha is a great resource. So that's really focused on the impact investing sector. But I would say, before you try to boil the ocean around impact, figure out what impact means to you, right? Like, there are deals that we will do through a gender lens that are not considered impact by a green investor who's focused on environmental, and vice versa. We see a lot of clean tech portfolios that are devoid of women or diversity. So that's not impact for us. So figure out what it is that impact means to you. If you were going to work on something, your blood, sweat, and tears, live and breathe it all day, what are the issue areas that you want to tackle? And then go deep on that vertical. Become an expert in that vertical. I think what's challenging is folks think, I just don't like where I am today. I want to do something more meaningful, but I have no idea what that means. If you want to be really useful to a founder or to a venture investor, figure out how to get brilliant on issue areas that you care most about.
Great. Heidi, thank you so much. This was very helpful. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.